Hello everybody, this is Taylor from ATAGO here in Japan. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Today we will be going over an introduction to our VISCO ATAGO viscosity meter. So I'll go ahead and get started here. This is a live webinar, so those that are attending us live today, please put your questions in the chat box and then I can answer them as we go through or maybe towards the end, depending on how much time we have. If you're watching this after the fact, please contact us with any questions that you have. We're easily reachable by email, and so we would be happy to help you out. So I will go ahead and get a presentation going for you guys to watch, and then we will kind of go through a few videos at the end. We have prepared a few videos for some common viscosity samples that we get asked from customers on how to measure. So you can really see how the visco is measured when you're picking your spindle, putting it in, which beaker, things like that. So without further ado, we will get started. Okay, so here is the introduction to the VISCO. Let's see here, portable viscosity meter. So the VISCO was really designed to just be a very small, easy to carry type of portable viscometer. As you can see here, it's really just kind of the size of my head. It's really not that big. You can easily take this carrying case with you when you're carrying it around, so it makes it really just easy to get any viscosity measurements right there in the lab, or if you want to do viscosity measurements out in the field or whatnot, then this is definitely the perfect viscometer for you. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit too about what viscosity is. This isn't the complete scientific definition, but just for you to kind of get an idea about what it is. So viscosity is an expression of viscousness, or like the thickness of a liquid. So there are some liquids that are really, really thin and they flow easily. They're kind of closer to water. And then there's some liquids that are really, really thick. They don't move if you're trying to pour them out of a beaker. Maybe more slimy and sticky like honey. So what a viscometer is going to do is kind of measure that thickness for you. And it's measuring it like the degree of the smoothness or stickiness. The way that a viscometer will do that, something like this, is measuring the substance's resistance to motion. So when we have a viscometer, we have something like this. There's a lot of different kinds of viscometers out there, but what ATAGO has is what's called a rotational viscometer. So just a rotational viscometer is going to use a small spindle, and it's going to be rotating. So rotational viscometer, something like this, is going to go right into the unit, and it's going to keep rotating around and measuring the force. The actual sample output for the viscometer in a degree of units is going to be kind of usually just 3 different ones if you're talking about rotational viscosity: pascals, millipascals, and centipoise. I think it just depends on where you are or your company, on which unit of measurement you use, but the VISCO focuses mainly for millipascals and centipoise, so that kind of covers the broadest range for viscosity. Okay. So if you're not familiar with millipascals or centipoise, when you get a number off of the VISCO, maybe you're not really sure, like when you just look at the number, how viscous something is. So just some quick examples. Water would be something as low as possible, like 1 millipascal per second, but then something really, really viscous, like mayonnaise, is going to get up to 8,000. So depending on what you're measuring, you're going to fall somewhere on the spectrum range for viscosity. In regards to the visco, it can actually go up really, really high for the actual viscosity, up to like 2 million. So it can get pretty high up there for some really thick samples. If you have any samples that you're unsure of if the visco can measure or not, we do have demo trials available, either by contacting us directly or some distributors we have in a bunch of different companies. So that's something that you can try as well, or you can just ask us and see what kind of data that we have here, and we can help you out. Of course, everybody's going to have different types of sample, like a different jam maker is going to make a different viscosity of jam than another, so it's probably best to get your hands on a unit if you can. So just talking more about different types of samples, so within the world of viscosity, things are normally known as Newtonian fluids or non-Newtonian fluids. So Newtonian fluids are the easy samples, I like to say. They're the ones that are going to flow pretty easily. When you apply force to them, they don't really change the composition of the sample at all. But when you have something like a non-Newtonian fluid, especially like butter, if you apply a force to butter, like if you're cutting it with a knife or you're using your finger to push into the butter, it's going to leave some type of mark. So that's the same thing with a rotational viscometer. Is you're using rotational force to measure viscosity. So sometimes it can kind of push into the sample. So if you are a customer that's doing some more non-Newtonian fluids, it might be best to contact us so that we can help you in determining that. That being said, our instruction manual does go over some tips and tricks for picking the correct spindle and beaker for your sample, but we are always here to support if needed. We will have some videos for a few of the samples like that are non-Newtonian. I believe we have some ketchup and other sauces, so you can kind of see what that looks like. So another thing that's really, really important in the world of viscosity, if you're going to start measuring viscosity, you have to know the temperature of the sample. So viscosity and temperature, they kind of go hand in hand. The more the sample is heated up, the less viscous it becomes. So it becomes thinner, more flowy. It's going to run out of your beaker. If it's a lower temperature, it's the opposite. It's going to get thicker. It's not going to run out of your beaker as well. So you can have the same sample and measure it at different temperatures and have it be different viscosities. So even if it's like the same honey, if you warm the honey up, it's going to be a different viscosity than if you cool the honey down. So when you're working with viscosity in fluids, the most accurate thing you can do is to control the temperature of the sample, but if you cannot, we do have an option actually for the visco here, where it's actually like a small temperature probe that you will just stick into the unit and it will measure into the beaker. So you can do it both ways. You can control the temperature or you can just monitor the temperature. We'll go over the couple different options so you can see what that's like. Okay, so again, here we are with our just regular visco. I'm not sure if many people are familiar with other types of visco on the market, or viscosity meters on the market, but normally they're these like pretty large instruments that like are pretty tall, they're wide, and they take up a lot of space in the lab. Something like visco is going to be a lot smaller. It's a lot simpler because it only has 2 glass beakers that it comes with and 3 different spindles. And then you just have to pick your speed. So there's not really a whole lot of thinking that you have to do and like choosing between a lot of different spindles depending on the sample. So we kind of simplified it and made it into just one little package right there. Now that being said, we do have other accessories that will help you out too, and there are 3 packages that I wanted to go over. So before we move on, this is the regular Visco or our rotational viscometer, Visco. Okay. Okay, perfect. So these are the three packages that we are going to talk about today. It's going to be our Visco package A, Visco package B, and Visco package E. So starting off, this is a pretty popular package. It's the Visco package A. So like I was saying before, the Visco is going to come with a couple of glass beakers, but actually a lot of people really like to get our cup adapter, which comes in the package A. So with package A, you get these cups, and instead of having to clean these glass beakers all the time, you can just pour your sample into a plastic cup, measure on the unit, and then just throw the cup away. So especially if you have something really, really sticky, like an adhesive or honey, it can take time and be kind of a nuisance to clean the beaker all the time. Another thing too, if you are right out on the production floor doing some emergency viscosity measurements, you might not want to take a piece of glass right out there, especially if it's a food facility. So it's going to be a lot safer with the paper or plastic cup. It's pretty standard. If you've heard of like a Dixie cup or just small paper cups that you get when you go to the doctor and drink some water. It's really just kind of that standard size. We do sell the paper cups and some plastic cups here too, but it's probably going to be more economical for you to get those on your own. So that's the Visco package A. It's probably one of our easiest, most basic packages. So next we have Visco package B. So Visco package B is for customers that are doing ultra low viscosity samples. And those are going to be things that are really, really thin and are going to be closer to water. They could be more like thinner chemicals, other thinners, maybe really, really low viscosity juices. Remember when I was saying before that the viscosity of water is close to 1 millipascal per second. You can see under the description there that it goes from 1 up to 2,000. So that's kind of really just for that lower range of samples. With the Visco package B, it's just the same instrument that you get when you purchase the regular Visco, but you get additional accessories to be able to measure the lower viscosity range. So it comes with an extra stand that you'll put with the longer beaker, a special spindle for low viscosity, and hanger, and that's it. So once you kind of put those together, you can start measuring the low viscosity. And then, oh yes, and this package is an additional cost. So when you buy just the regular Visco, if you do need that lower viscosity, you want to make sure that you're getting Visco package B, not the regular. Okay, moving on. So this is Visco package E. This is probably my favorite because it is kind of like an all-in-one in terms of temperature, regular viscosity, and then also low viscosity. So the Visco temperature controller is going to be the accessory that is going to give you the most accurate measurements in terms of viscosity. So when you're directly controlling the sample temperature and measuring at that temperature constantly, it's going to help you get stable measurements. And if you are the type of customer that maybe out on the production line you have your sample really hot, you can measure in the lab as if your sample were still out on the production line. So normally if you go out to your line, you have to take your sample out, you have to bring it back to the lab. It's probably cooled down by that point. If you do have a water bath or something, you have to warm it back up, and then you have to put it into the unit, and it might have cooled down again at that point. Then you have to monitor the temperature. So it can be kind of hard to keep the temperature of the sample stable while also getting stable viscosity measurements. So what's really nice about the temperature controller is it's just doing all of that work for you. You just put it into the unit, set your temperature, and then you're able to measure. So that can be for low viscosity samples, higher viscosity samples, or just mid viscosity samples. It's kind of like the whole package, the whole deal. So that's probably the one that is going to be my personal favorite. And then it's actually our newest accessory for the Visco currently. So it's possible that some people attending today might not have heard about it. And that will be in a video later, so you should be able to see that. So we are already getting pretty close to the end. I do have some common questions here, but before I ask them, or before I answer them, do we have any questions yet? No? No. Okay, perfect. So you can see some common questions that we have from other people. So I'm considering purchasing. Can I try it before I buy it? So like I said before, we do have free demo units if you contact us directly here in Japan, but we do have other branch offices and distributors in different countries. So they should have demo units as well and should be able to hook you up. So please inquire about that if you are interested. Another question is it possible to output data? So if you know ATAGO and our other products, you definitely know that we have data output options for those. Visco is the same way. There's a port here for a mini B USB cable. So you can actually, while you're measuring, output the data to your computer via USB. Another question, how do I choose the right spindle and speed? So like I said before, we have a few different speeds, but also spindles and some beakers. So I think a good thing to do is just to ask us and also read the instruction manual to see if you can get a good guide that way. But we're definitely here to help you out. Another question, can Visco be calibrated? So if you are looking to check calibration of your Visco, we do have some standard solutions available. So please contact us for that. There are some other standards you can use too, I believe, but I think the best choice is to get them from us in case any further calibration does need to happen, and then we can help you there. Another question, is there a correlation with the B-type viscometer? So this one is just a regular rotational viscometer. There is another type of rotational viscometer out there called B-type rotational viscometer. This one, some samples are correlated with B-type rotational viscometers, depending on what settings you're using in the sample, but ATAGO does actually have another B-type rotational viscometer as well, called the Visco BL. So we actually have a webinar coming up pretty soon at the end of this month so that you can see the difference between the Visco BL and then also our regular Visco. So please make sure to check that out if you are kind of more familiar with the B-type rotational viscometer or you're curious to know about that. Okay, so now we've gotten to our point where we can see some samples actually being measured. I'm going to do another question check. Anything?
No.
All right, so then we can proceed. Alrighty. Okay. So I think ketchup, dressings, those types of things are definitely the most requested things that we get from customers in terms of how to measure. So when you have ketchup or any sample, you want to fill it up to the correct line on the beaker. So there's, you see the two fill lines on there and it says A1. So you want to make sure that you fill up to the right fill line for your spindle. So A1 is the spindle that we're using here, so it's filled up to that line nicely. Usually higher viscosity needs A2 or A3 spindles and the large beaker. So then we're going to put in, okay, perfect. So we also want to make sure that we fill the, here, let's go back, we're going a little fast. So going back a little bit. So there's a few lines on the spindle to the right. We want to make sure that we're filling to the correct fill line, but we're also filling to the correct line on the spindle. I think on the spindle is much more important because the first line is kind of more of a guide. So once we have our settings put in, we can measure. It's doing some flashing just because of the screen of the Visco when you're taking a video. It will not flash when you actually have it. So after that, we have some Caesar salad dressing as well, filling up and putting it in. And we're still using our A2 spindle here. Like I said before, we want to make sure that when we're actually putting it into the beaker that it's filled up to that middle line on the spindle, not just the fill line on the beaker. Make sure that our settings are correct. So we have the A2 spindle, we have the large beaker, and then we've set it for 250 RPM. And then we will go ahead and hit start, and then it will measure. So you can kind of see that it gets a little bit like it's fluctuating, but that little fluctuation is okay with viscosity. So if you're seeing huge fluctuation, not okay, but if it's moving just a little bit, like in that decimal point, then that is okay. Okay, so let's talk about chunky samples here really quick. So we can expect that there's going to be some lower repeatability when chunks are present in the sample. So if you're doing some things like salsas or some types of spaghetti sauces or tomato sauces that have tomato chunks, because those are interfering with the rotation of the spindle, those may be not as repeatable. So just kind of be aware of that when you're measuring with a rotational viscometer. If they're really huge chunks, just take them out with a spoon or whatnot so that you can measure. So just kind of filling up and going through. So you can kind of see it's pretty much the same process, similar process of just making sure that you're loading the sample correctly and you have the right spindle. So this time we're using spindle A3 for even higher viscosity. Okay. Okay, so once we finish measuring with our tomato sauce here, we're going to move over to some other samples like dish soap and shampoo so that you guys can see that. Okay, perfect. There we go. Let's move on. Okay, before I move to a different sample, do we have any questions?
No.
No. Okay. Okay, moving on to some other kind of cosmetic-y or cleaning type of samples. So here we have the small beaker this time. So let's see how the Visco performs with our dish soap. So we have small beaker that we're using before, and then now we have this bigger type of spindle. This is the A1. So for the lower viscosity, we want to use our bigger spindle with a smaller beaker. Okay. Okay, perfect. You'll also see kind of that to measure with the small beaker, we do need to put in a little adapter. Not too much work to put that little piece in there, but you're going to want to make sure you use it so that it's in there nice and snug. So now we've got different spindle and different beaker going on, so we just want to make sure that we have the correct settings on there as well. Looks like we're doing a higher RPM as well. And you can kind of see now that it's a thinner sample how fast it moves in there. So it looks like 1,397 to 1,402 millipascals for this dish soap sample. Now we have some shampoo, same concept, putting it in, but we've switched our beaker now because we have a higher viscosity sample. So we want to use the larger beaker for higher viscosity and the smaller spindle for higher viscosity as well. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit just because I think we've seen the loading of the beaker and everything in there. So this looks pretty stable of around 7,600 for the viscosity. Moving on to conditioner, which is even thicker than shampoo. You can see how we're going in there. Looks like we can still use A3 spindle, even for the higher viscosity sample. Okay. We start to stabilize a little bit there, around 2,000, a little under 2,300 for this one. And that's for shampoo and conditioner and dish soap. Okay, so like I said before, Visco Package E is probably going to be my favorite, just because it can measure everything and control the temperature. You'll notice that this one was actually called Visco 895. Visco 895 is really just a lighter version of the regular Visco. So if you are really going to be carrying it around places, you might want to get the 895 version just because it's lighter. It doesn't mean it's any less durable or anything like that. It's just made with some lighter materials. So we're just kind of going over the different type of accessories that we have that come with the temperature controller in the Visco. So different ones for if you're measuring lower viscosity or if you're measuring regular viscosity while using the temperature controller. And that was showing just the USB cable that we had before. So it comes with just the regular spindles that we're used to, some other little accessories for, oh, let's stop here. Let's see. So some other little accessories if we're going to be measuring low viscosity or small volume. And then that's the just before was the small beaker holder that I was talking about before. You won't use that with the regular temperature controller. You'll only use it when you're not using the temperature controller. And then just different hooks for the different spindles that you'll be using. More stuff that we need. So that's the main temperature unit. We have some spindle holders, the large beaker that you won't use with the temperature controller, and also the small beaker that you won't use with the temperature controller, just the regular Visco. And then some height adjustments if you're doing low viscosity, and then that's the main Visco unit. And then the temperature sensor if you are going to measure the temperature of the actual sample itself. And we'll talk about that. And that was the temperature control unit. Okay, so here we're just kind of putting it together. So holding right now is the temperature controller unit, like where you'll actually put the beaker with the sample, and then on the right is the control unit that you will actually control the setting of the temperature. So once you have that all plugged in and ready to go, then you can put your sample in to be loaded and start measuring. So here's our like a beaker, or we call chamber. Those are the fill lines again, some approximate volumes too. If you want to measure them out beforehand and then pour them in, they should end up around the fill line. So depending on what spindle you're using, you want to fill up to the correct fill line. Once you have it in there, you will go ahead and put it into the temperature controller itself. Make sure that it's lined up correctly. It goes in nicely, and then you are ready to go. Okay, so one nice thing about the Visco when you're actually putting the spindles in is it's kind of like a one push type of thing. It just clicks in. Some type of viscometers you have to screw them in, or it's like a push and release. Ours is really just a click style, so once it clicks in, you can be pretty, pretty safe that it's not going to come out, and it's kind of harder to break that style than some others. So here we're just showing the height adjustment if you're going to be doing the low viscosity version of all of this. So it seems kind of complicated, I think, because we're doing two different types of measurement. So we're doing the low viscosity as opposed to regular. So with low viscosity, it's a little bit more prep because you have to use the special low viscosity spindle and the hook so that you can put the spindle into the unit, but it's really just takes maybe a couple extra seconds to put that on. So this is measuring the sample temperature, just so you can measure the actual sample temperature while you're controlling it on the temperature controller itself. The thing is if you're setting the temperature on the temperature controller, it's not like an instant change when you're when you're at the actual sample. So it's good to kind of measure the actual sample and then adjust the controller as needed so that you can make sure that your sample is at the right temp. So it's pretty easy to set the temperature on the controller, and then once that's set in, then you can kind of start your adjustments from there if needed. So then just again, this is for temperature control. It's not actually measuring the sample, so you'll want to measure the actual sample as well. So the temperature display is right there on the screen. So if you're measuring the sample temperature using the probe that we inserted earlier, then you should see the temperature there. And then this is just adjusting a little bit so that you can get the same temperature, or the temperature on the display that you're looking for. So if you wanted to get it as close to 20 degrees C as possible, then you would want to change the temp controller a little bit so that you can get to the correct temperature. So then once the temperature is stable, you'll go ahead and take out the temperature probe from before, and then you can begin actually measuring your sample. And that's just for removing the temperature probe if you're using the low viscosity option. Put our cover back on for protection, and then we can start. So start button is still just on there, the main Visco unit. So once we press start, then we can begin measuring. And that's really it. Okay, perfect. So that was a little longer than I thought, but I want to just thank you guys again for joining today. Those that are watching later, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Before I end the webinar, just one last question check. None? Okay, perfect. So please make sure to sign up or attend our next webinar that we have comparing this regular Visco with the Visco BL B-type rotational viscometer. But thank you again for joining us today, and we will see you next